Hello, all. Welcome to Iran 1400's Spotlighting an Author event. I am Sydney Martin. I am y'all's host today, and thank you for joining us as we discuss Marouf Cabi's The Formation of Modern Kurdish Society in Iran, Modernity, Modernization, and Social Change from 1921 until 1979 today. Thank you for joining us. As many of you know, the goal of the Iran 1400 project is to encourage productive conversations about Iran by looking at the evolution of ideas and institutions within the country during the last century. We are certain that today's discussion will be a valuable contribution to that mission. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to share some remarks on behalf of Iran 1400's advisory board. Dr. Cabi, on behalf of the advisory board and the team at Iran 1400 Project, we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. The Iran 1400 Project's mission is to foster a greater understanding of Iran's history during the past century in order to promote an informed conversation about Iran's future. We are honored to have you with us today to share your research and insights on the Iranian experience. Welcome. Now, before we begin, I will introduce our guest. Marouf Cabi is a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Sciences Middle East Center. He obtained his PhD in history from the University of St. Andrews in 2019. He has taught Middle Eastern histories and cultures at the University of St. Andrews at undergraduate and postgraduate levels. His research has appeared in several academic journals, and he regularly presents public lectures for Iranian and Kurdish communities in Europe and online. He also works as an interpreter and prepares country reports for various UK-based organizations and law firms. For those of y'all unfamiliar with the format, today we will be spending 30 minutes listening to Dr. Cabi discuss his book, and this will be followed by 20 to 30 minutes for a Q&A session. Feel free to send those questions whenever they come to your mind. You can post them in the Q&A section on the Zoom, or you can go ahead and email those to media@iran1400.org. We have a quick teaser to play, and then we can begin the event. Dr. Cabi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Sydney Martin, Tabi Anvari, and Mateen Kornavasi for their kindness and for organizing this event. I'm very excited to be here to talk about this book. The book is about the state-led modernization of Iran during the Pahlavi political order and its impact on Kurdish society. The focus of the book is, however, on the period starting between the Second World War until the 1979 revolution, including the era of the so-called White Revolution. What I mean by Kurdish society, you can see the map of Iran divided into around 30 provinces, and the Kurdistan province is located in the west of Iran. However, the Kurdistan province never represents the Kurdish region in Iran. So the Kurdish region in Iran looks like something like that. And there are other Kurdish communities in other parts of the country, for example, in northeastern part of Iran, in Khorasan region. Iran's administrative divisions causes a problem for research, for generating data. So when you go and try generate data for your research, these administrative divisions of Iran is not very helpful. So you have to add data from many other places to get something close to something which you're looking for. And many important Kurdish cities are located because of this administrative division located to other neighboring provinces, many important cities and hundreds of villages. So I use Kurdish society to refer to this region and Kurdish communities. Just a few words about the sources. I mentioned some sources for the book. One is the National Archive in London, which contains important sources relevant to the subject of the book. For example, on socio-economic developments of Iran in the 1960s and the 70s. I spent many days in the archives, and you can see a centralizing modernization going on in Iran with no plan, no economic plan for the provinces. Other sources are journals published between 1921 and 1978 during the entire Pahlavi era. You can see the name of some of them, Ayanda, Iran Shar, Ta'lim wa Tarbiyat, Amuzush, which then changed to Amuzush wa Parvaresh in 1937 or 38. Very important sources. Why? Because the formation of the modern state is not only a political process. It's not about coercion, oppression. It's also a cultural process. And when you go through thousands of pages of these journals, you can see a cultural process going on. And these are the images of some of those journals. These are kept in the library of the University of St. Andrews, Scotland, a very important sources. So, and it's joy to go through them. And I hope you have access to these important sources. And also a few words about the motivation behind the book. But as you can see from these pictures and from the cover page of the book ends in 1979. Around that time, Kurdish society was changing. Iran was changing at a staggering pace. This is Kurdistan, the emergence of modern education, urbanization, and the expansion of economy, the expansion of capitalism, the emergence of modern institutions, modern healthcare, audio, especially visual means of communication, cinema, theater, and of course, sport. You can see girl students competing in a sport competition. This is the city of Saqqez during the 1970s. But you could see a contradiction. Life didn't improve for everybody. You could see the proliferation of street porters, the poor neighborhoods, child labor, and so on and so forth, migration to urban centers. So this entered my consciousness and stayed with me ever since. And when I started my academic studies, I was never completely satisfied with what I read about modern Iran and Kurdish society. There were exceptions, of course, but I thought we could do better. And the purpose of the book is that the book discusses a dual process of socio-economic modernization and cultural homogenization. A cultural homogenization. Just because before we go to the chapters, I think I mixed there. So it tries to, it discusses a dual process of, when you see, look at the cover page, the concepts of modernity and modernization, they manifest themselves in these, those simultaneous processes of socio-economic change and cultural change, socio-economic modernization and cultural modernization. And the book tries to answer a question at the core of this book, that while the Kurdish society is integrating socio-economically into modern Iran, it vigorously has resisted the homogenization of the cultural homogenization. So this, how we explain that, I think the answer is in the interactions, the dialectics of this dual process of socio-economic modernization and cultural homogenization. So that's the purpose of the book, the main argument of the book, which explains the interactions of these two processes of socio-economic change and cultural change. This takes me to the chapters of the book. The first chapter, the integration of Kurdish society into modern Iran, brings Kurdish society into the modern times. It explains the transformation of power relations from empire, emirate, or principality to modern state, ethnic minority, or aqaliyat qawmi. So it means that the Kurds were defined in modern times as aqaliyat qawmi. Modernity brought fixed borders and undermined the capacity of Kurdish society and Iran in general for it undermined its economic potential and sorry, I'm just mixed with and this chapter basically goes on to discuss the integrating tendency of modernization and explains that the state-led modernization basically its tendency was to strengthen or create new bonds between Iranian society. Another part of the chapter is the relationship between modernization and Kurdish identity, between Kurdish modernization and Kurdish identity. It argues that modernization reinvigorated Kurdiety or Kurdishness, the struggle for cultural and political rights of the Kurds. And important bulwarks of this Kurdiety, Kurdishness were religion and language. And language. And the second, the next chapter, as I explained, that basically the book focuses on the white revolution of the 50s and between the decades between the 1950s and 70s. Of course, the white revolution formally started in 1963. However, the chapter tries to define the white revolution. It was an idea exploited. In 1949, you come across an article in one of those journals, Ayanda, by Mahmoud Afshar, who explains white revolution as a peaceful way to transform Iran. The term was used by others, politicians and statesmen. However, the white revolution of which formally started was a revolution from above to preserve the monarchy and to prevent revolution from below. However, the era is very important. It is a significant period in the modern history of Iran because it formed and consolidated the modern structures of Iran. And its impact on Kurdish society was revolutionary. Kurdish society had been profoundly changed by the end of the 1970s. To identify change, one can refer to rapid urbanization, the restructuring of the Kurdish working class, the relationship between village and city, the emergence of modern education, modern healthcare, and the expansion of the new visual means of communication. However, modernization was a centralizing modernization. And what was the legacy? What is the legacy of the white revolution's socio-economic developments for Iran and for Kurdish society is a centralizing modernization. Its legacy is underdevelopment and lack of provincial plans. These are debates still going on about underdevelopment or Tawsa'a in Iran. And the chapter explains that this is the legacy of the centralizing modernization during the 60s and 70s. The next chapter talks about the social consequences of modernization, land reform and the expansion of capitalism, migration to the city, the transformation of class structures, the emergence of a modern Kurdish working class, and the emergence of a middle class, lower middle class. And it talks about city-village disparity, which was maintained during this period, despite some significant changes in some part of the region. However, the disparity between city and village continued, and even by the end of the 80s, the conditions in many villages were shocking. Significant social consequences in the spheres of education and healthcare, which the chapter basically discusses how these two modernizing institutions expanded with important outcomes. In the next chapter, I discuss the political and cultural consequences of modernization. It's explained, it presents Kurdish society as a dynamic society. This is very important. This challenges prevalent assumptions that Kurdish society in Iran has historically been in a cycle of hibernation and awakening. For example, it says that according to that view, that the Kurds awoke in 1946 and established a republic, and then they went into slumber and then woke up again in 1979. But that's not the case. That's not the history of this society. Having said that, the years between 1946 and 1968 is defined as the formative years of the Kurdish modern opposition. It talks about the movement of the 60s, the rebellion of the 1960s. And this is very important. By 1968-69, the movement was over, the rebellion was over. However, those who had started the movement, many of them university students, of course, influenced by the idea of armed struggle, their main task was to reorganize the Democratic Party and start political activism inside Iranian Kurdistan. But they were chased down, they were captured. The Iranian army even invaded Iraq and Kurdistan, that region under the Barzani movement, captured the revolutionaries and executed many of them later on. However, what the chapter finds is that the movement did not have any, at least explicit, plan for armed struggle. This is very important. So the Kurdish society is not, when talking about the Kurds, it's not always about guns, mountains, and riding horses. So they were trying to reinvigorate the Kurdish movements and reorganize political activism inside Iranian Kurdistan. Significantly, the years which followed is characterized by the expansion of the urban educated generation, the formation of the nuclei of modern political parties, the parties which played a significant role during the 1979 revolution and in the Kurdish movement which followed. This is very important to note that when the new generation of political activists try to reorganize, reform their organization or create a new organization, they distance themselves from the idea of armed struggle. And this is, at the same time, we know that other Iranian organizations, such as the Fadayan or Mujahideen, they committed themselves to armed struggle as tactic and strategy. But in Kurdistan, these groups committed themselves to the idea of social revolution and not armed struggle. This is a very important development for the 1970s. Culturally, the establishment of the hegemony of Persian culture and language in this period is what constitutes the main point talking about the cultural consequences of modernization. This happened, and hegemony in Gramscian sense. I mean, this notion that the Persian language is superior to other languages of Iran was accepted by everybody. And this was helped by the expansion of audio, especially visual means of communication, by cinema, and also importantly by modern education, which was in Persian. To elaborate on that, since the formation of the modern state, the Iranian intellectuals defined the Persian language as the national language of Iran. However, there was resistance from other languages, and this didn't work. And by the 1960s, we have this kind of duality of official and local. So there were more emphasis on the so-called local languages of Iran. And for that, there were many contributors to that. One was nativism in general, which emphasized the local languages in order to preserve, as they called it, Iranian culture in the face and protect Iranian culture against what they call the cultural onslaught of the West, or hujum farhangi gharb. So other languages became local, and Persian became the official language of Iran, or was defined more than before as the official language of Iran. But this was led to a kind of duality, the official meaning superior and local meaning inferior. This is the notion of hegemony in a Gramscian sense is also significant because according to this book, hegemony is the main mechanism of cultural interactions in modern Iran. Of course, there are colonial methods, like I mentioned, the administrative divisions of Iran, dividing spaces and dividing the population to control them more easily. However, it is hegemony, or the hegemony of one over others, which constitutes the main mechanism of cultural interactions in modern Iran. So that's about political and cultural consequences of modernization. The next chapter, which is very important for this process, for this book, is modernization of gender relation. This is not only a chapter, but any research on modern Iran, including Kurdish society, any social research on social change and transformation has to deal with the transformation of gender relations. Excuse me. And the chapter is entitled Modernization of Gender Relations to avoid, this is against the notion of the emancipation of women, that the Pahlavi era was about the emancipation of women. That's not the case, but we have the modernization of gender relations. And the chapter starts by discussing modernity and the idea of the new woman, an idea alongside other modern ideas such as the nation, progress, civilization, culture, and an idea which guided the modern states, intellectuals, and literary figures. From these perspectives, the chapter deals with the era after White Revolution and identifies significant changes, tangible changes, and in four spheres: the new science, modern education, legal changes, economic changes. The new science affected the size of family. Modern education expanded the educated generation of women. So all these changes the chapter discusses in relation to Kurdish society to understand how the society changed in this respect. Of course, for all change and transformation, women's agency was crucial. Resistance to various forms of male dominance. And basically, methodologically, the chapter treats women as human beings with names and faces, not as a category in development theory. So this basically, this chapter, this discussion of the modernization of gender relations in relation to Kurdish society in Iran is very important for this book, which I hope I covered the main points of the chapter. This takes me to the contribution of this book to studies of modern Iran. I believe it is a foundation, can be regarded as a foundation for social change studies. If you want to understand why, basically, to explain Iran or Kurdish society at the present, we have to go back. We have to go back to the foundations, to the way Iran in general and Kurdish society was transformed during the 20th century. And the book opens new avenues rather than discovering new dead ends. What does it mean It means if you read the book, you won't find every answers to every questions you have. But it asks you to look at the interactions of that dual process of socio-economic modernization and cultural homogenization. And that's where basically you can find your answers for questions or create new questions. So that's the contribution, another contribution of the book to our studies of Iran. And finally, in conclusion, apart from setting new questions regarding social change studies, culturally, the book stresses a non-antagonistic approach to the hegemonic culture in Iran. It stresses interpolation. It means that we have to promote other cultures and languages in Iran. We have to use the hegemonic culture as cultural capital and avoid antagonistic approach. And academically, it emphasizes the point that Iranian and Kurdish studies are not mutually exclusive. Quite on the contrary, subjects relevant to Kurdish society or other societies in Iran, they should not be treated as local or only relevant to some part of the country. Such subjects should become central to studies of modern Iran. So I want to stop here. I think I have been speaking for almost 30 minutes. I lost my notes in one point, but yeah, I would like to stop here, and I'm looking forward to your questions and yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cabi, for that very, very valuable and interesting presentation. A reminder for those in the audience, y'all can send your questions to media@iran1400.org, or you can just type them in the Zoom Q&A. While y'all think about those questions, I can make a few announcements on behalf of the Iran 1400 project. So to let y'all know, we do have another upcoming spotlighting an author event on January 27th with Robert Asadi. We'll be talking about post-revolutionary Iran, the leader, the people, and the three powers. Y'all can sign up for that. If you are signed up for our newsletter, y'all will get a notification about that. And also keep an eye out for 2 upcoming podcasts that we will be releasing. These are interviews that we've done with our panelists for when the Iran 1400 project presented at the Association for Iranian Studies. These will be with Dr. Aram Hassami and Ehsan Kashfi. So keep an eye out for those as well. Now, while we continue waiting for y'all's questions, we can start with, I'll start with one of my own. So obviously, this is probably a question on everyone's mind. Could you talk about the relevance of your book and Kurdish identity in particular for how it relates to the current protests in Iran?
Well, the book, the first part of that, Kurdish identity, I explained, I didn't elaborate on that, but I explained that modernization reinvigorated what I call Kurdiety, or a sense of Kurdishness belonging to the Kurds and struggling for the cultural and political rights of the Kurds. I avoid most of the time the term Kurdish nationalism. Nationalism, for me at least, or in this book, has negative connotations, but I think Kurdiety, if defined in this way, sense of Kurdishness and struggling for political and cultural rights, this struggle is quite legitimate. So modernization transformed Kurdish identity. And that's what you come across throughout the 20th century. By 1970s, you have modern political parties. By 1946, and this is important actually, the Kurdish Republic of 1946 is most of the time has been defined as a tribal experience. But however, I mean, even by then you have Kurdish intelligentsia, if you like, Roshan Fikran, with their own publications. And when you look at the list of the Republic's ministries, you know, you realize that the Republic is quite an urban phenomena, not led by tribal chiefs who betrayed it in the end. By the 1970s, you have new clay of modern political parties active during the revolution and in the Kurdish movement and until now. So that's the basically the impact of modernization of Kurdish identity. It's very dynamic, changing all the time. So we can talk about that for hours, but this is a very, the other part of the question, I like that, and it's very important to understand what is going on in Kurdistan at the moment. They look at the level of organizations, you know, the presence of women, the radical slogans, the potential of this society when it comes across this the motto, a woman life freedom, and the motto quickly, I mean the slogan quickly becomes a movement. It wouldn't have become a movement if there wasn't that foundation which was laid during those decades which we briefly talked about. This is very important. No slogan will become a movement. This is true talking about Iran in general and Kurdish society in particular. It won't become a movement if there isn't any foundation. So that's why I mean the book is relevant. You want to look for foundations. You know, we talked about the modern education, the expansion of the modern education, urbanization. These are significant developments, and that's the relevance of the book to today's uprising.
Thank you so much. To get a little more detailed there, your last chapter, of course, talks about women in Kurdistan. What are there tangible influences from the Kurdish women's movement in the Iranian women's movement right now? Like, for example, the slogan "Women Life Freedom" originally being from Kurdish. Could you talk more about that?
If I got your question right, so you mean other impact of other movements in other parts of the region?
Specifically, how as a women's movement in Kurdistan, what effect has that had on a wider women's movement in Iran?
Okay, I mean you can understand change and transformation in Kurdish society in the context of Iran. It didn't happen in isolation. First, during the period after the Second World War, we have the women's movement across Iran, women's organization, and then this spreads to other parts of Iran, along with the expansion of modern education and other changes. So the impact is, I think, the radicalism of we can talk about the radicalism of the movement because of the Kurdish movement, because of the presence of Kurdish political parties for the last 4 decades, non-stop. They have other parts of Iran lack that basically, this kind of organized political activism. So radicalism is radicalism, probably is what can impact the movement, women's movement across Iran. If that was, did
Yes,
I answer the question? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, you answered that. Thank you so much.
I mean, I'm not looking for any big differences between, because I say it's everything understandable in the context of Iran, but Kurdistan has some particularities, difficult word, but as I say, basically because of enjoying political parties and the ongoing Kurdish movement for the last 4 decades, they can and have impacted the other parts of Iran.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from the audience. Huri Berberian asked or said, "Thank you, Dr. Cabi, for your presentation. Could you comment on Kurdish women's organizations, when they began to form, what their goals were, etc.?"
Okay, I have another question before that, but I insert this one first. When they began to form and what their goals were. During the 1979 and after that, which was quickly followed by the Kurdish movements in 1979, 1979 and 1980, many women's union and organizations, societies were formed across Iranian Kurdistan. It militarized, I think, militarization of Kurdistan in 1980 put an end to those experiences, and the armed struggle followed. But those societies and unions left a legacy for the later generation. And in the last 2 decades, we have been witnessing the expansion of the civil society organizations and movements. So by the Kurdish movements specifically, we are talking about women's NGOs, women's societies, women, and other kinds of organizations. And if these organizations have constituted parts of Kurdish women's movement in Iranian Kurdistan. So organizations, we have civil society organizations in Iranian Kurdistan at the moment in different forms and shape. And they mainly expanded during the last 2 decades since the early 2000s. I can see another question, if I may answer that.
I can read the next one. Wendell Stewart asked or said, "Thank you, Professor Cabi, for your very insightful lecture. My question is, how eager are Kurdish students to study at national universities, such as the University of Tehran or Marouf Cabi University, for example? Or do Kurdish students tend to study in regional Kurdish schools?"
We have, right now at the moment, we have universities or branch of a university in every cities in Kurdistan. This wasn't the case 2 decades ago. The University of Kurdistan was formed in middle of the 1990s. Until then, there wasn't any University of Kurdistan in the provincial city of Kurdistan, Sanandaj. and we have the Free University, Azad University, and Payam-Noor University. They have branches in every Kurdish cities. But yes, students, Kurdish students go to study in other parts of the country, in Tehran, Shiraz, Tabriz, everywhere. So, I mean, yes, they are very eager to study, and this is a very significant development in the last 2 decades, the expansion of the institutions of higher education. For example, in undergraduate level, I think we have like 8,000 graduates per year in the Kurdistan province, which is not all the Kurdish region, but the Kurdistan province alone has that amount of, that number of graduates per year. And many, several hundreds doctorate students graduate, PhD students graduate with a PhD, several hundreds per year. Quite amazing numbers and significant developments in the last 2 decades, the expansion of the institutions of higher education. So yes, I mean, actively people, I mean, not only eager to study, but they have been studying in every part of Iran. There are, I mean, up to 19 or 20 academic journals only in the Kurdistan province. And there are many, many more published across Iran in which Kurdish students, Kurdish academics write articles. I think that's enough. I hope I have answered that question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cabi. A reminder to those in the audience, y'all can ask your questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. We have another 10 minutes that we could discuss. The next question, so in your book, you talked a lot about the inspiration for writing the book being a lack of resources on academia relevant to Kurdistan. Since writing this book, what else do you still feel is missing in academia related to Kurdistan?
Missing, yes, if we go back many decades, yeah, we need more sources when we go back to, for example, to the period after or before the Second World War. But however, in the last 4 decades, we have the archive, we have a richer archive for studying Kurdish society and subjects relevant to studies of modern Iran from peripheral perspectives. However, I think the main problem is methodology. And how we see modern Iran, how we define Iran. I always tend to say that Persia and Iran are 2 different things. But when I began my academic studies and I read books on Iran, you know, many books sounded like they were about Persia, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't about Iran. Iran as a multicultural, multilinguistic, multilingual entity. So I think first and foremost, the problem is methodology, how we look at Iran rather than lacking sources. I think that's so, yes, I acknowledge we need more sources, but I think the first thing is methodology.
Interesting. The next question is, What most surprised you when you were doing your research for this book? Was there anything that you didn't see coming, anything that you got wrong?
Oh, yeah, definitely. When I started my books, I had a very, I confess, superficial understanding of for example, the era of the White Revolution. When I continued my research and continued reading books on the period, I realized that we are dealing with a significant epoch in modern history of Iran. Yes, there are lots of books, many books on Iran have analyzed that period since the Second World War until the 1979 revolution. But still, we need more research. We need more research, and we have to do more on that period. And yes, that was, I basically, when I finished my research, my book, then I became more informed about the era. I understood the significance of the era. I appreciated that era even more. So we have, of course, we have to critically deal with that era. Let me give you an example before I tell you if there was anything I got it wrong. Recently, this is relevant to the current uprising. Recently, we have had some, narratives of the Pahlavi era published, broadcast by Persian television channels, and representing the era implicitly or explicitly as an era of progress. Okay, but that's not the case. So, when you go and study that period between the Second World War and 1980, you will appreciate that that period more than before. Of course, there were many things I don't say I got it wrong, but I realized I could have done more or have consulted more sources. For example, the chapter on the modernization of gender relations, it was something quite new for me. I had my motivations and I knew it was important, but I could have done, basically have consulted more sources. Needless to say that we still need more research and book on that topics as well.
Thank you, Dr. Cabi. Wrapping this up, we do have one final question from the Zoom Q&A from an anonymous attendee.
Yeah.
Asking to follow up on someone else's question, are there no women's organizations dating earlier than the 20th century?
I don't call it like organizations, but we have women's agency. For example, the book acknowledges a figure which was, one scholar calls such figures women worthies. They established schools for girls and they encourage others. For example, the wives of important political figures. In 1946, the Kurdistan, Kurdistan Republic, the wife of the president of the republic founded schools for girls and some organizations, a women's organization. In Iraqi Kurdistan, we have Hafsa Khan Naqib, who similarly founded a women's organization, but they didn't last long, and women's organization in a sense we use today belong to later periods in the 60s and 70s across Iran. The Women's Organization of Iran did a great job. There are books about that. And then, yes, in Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdistan, we have to wait as talking about movement more organized movement. We have to wait until the 1979 revolution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cabi, for those great answers, as well as your time today. Really fascinating presentation and a very interesting Q&A session to follow. I want to say thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. If you enjoyed this presentation, please do check out Marouf Cabi's book, The Formation of Modern Kurdish Society in Iran, Modernity, Modernization and Social Change from 1921 to 1979. If you're new to the project, you can find us at Iran1400.org. We have content in English and in Farsi in the form of articles, videos, podcasts, and the like about ideas and institutions in Iran and how they've evolved in the last 100 years. These include modernity, identity, education, fine arts, and the women's movement, and much, much more. If you scroll to the bottom of our website, you can sign up for a newsletter and you'll be alerted about upcoming events like the one that you are at right now. And also you can find us on social media at Iran 1400 Project. Lastly, we also have a variety of articles on the women's movement and modernity that relate back to today's event. You can find those on our website. Thanks again to you, Dr. Cabi, for joining us today, and thanks to everyone in the audience. Please join us next time.
Okay, thank you very much, Sydney. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Of course.